In January 1975, a young couple arrived at the Snowmass Village, Colorado, to begin 5 days of skiing lessons set against the backdrop of the mountain resort. Caryn Campbell, a nurse, was there with the fiancé and his children for what should have been an enjoyable experience. But this soon turned to worry and then horror. Just over a month later, the answer to his mysterious disappearance was solved. Campbell's frozen body was found on a dirt road just outside the resort, and it was determined she had been beaten to death. With other women disappearing around the same time, police suspected Caryn Campbell had been a victim of serial killer Ted Bundy.
When 23-year-old Caryn Campbell arrived at the Wildwood Lodge in Snowmass, Colorado, on January 11, 1975. With her fiancé, Dr. Raymond Godofsky, and his children, she was thrilled about their 5-day skiing course. However, the excitement quickly turned to tragedy. On the evening of January 12th, after dining at a nearby restaurant, Caryn and Dr. Godofsky decided to walk back to the lodge despite the bitter cold. Around 8:30 p.m., Caryn excused herself, saying she needed to retrieve a magazine from their second-floor room. This was the last time Dr. Godofsky saw her. Dr. Godofsky waited in the lobby. Two friends later reported seeing Caryn exit the elevator on the second floor and head toward her room. When she didn't return after a significant amount of time, Dr. Godofsky went to look for her. At their room, there was no sign of Caryn, nothing appeared disturbed, and there were no signs of a struggle. When police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the lodge, including elevator shafts, crawl spaces, and all 140 rooms, but found no trace of Caryn. Investigators questioned guests at the ski resort. Michael Fisher, a Pitkin County District Attorney's investigator, interviewed over 100 people but found no evidence of foul play. A ski patrol scoured the area, but their efforts were in vain. Caryn Campbell had vanished without a trace. Initially, suspicion fell on her fiancé, Dr. Raymond Godofsky, a doctor from Farmington Hills. However, friends confirmed that there was no conflict between the couple, who were planning to marry that spring. "I've seen some gals take a quick walk on their boyfriends when they've got a beef," said Fisher, "but this is another thing altogether. Caryn had simply vanished." It was believed that Caryn Campbell would not have ventured far. The couple did not have a car, and her skis were still in her room. Given the harsh winter conditions, most people couldn't walk more than 30 feet from the road, said investigator Michael Fisher. Operators of plane and bus services in the resort were notified of Campbell's disappearance and provided with her description and photos. With no evidence of foul play, the police eventually called off their search. Fisher told the press that he had no idea what happened to Caryn Campbell. "I've ruled out gypsies, flying saucers, occult people, and cattle rustlers," he said. Soon, the mystery of Caryn Campbell's disappearance would be solved. Just over a month after she went missing, the naked and frozen body of a woman was located on February 17, 1975. A passing motorist came across the remains on a nearby road along Owl Creek, situated between Aspen and Snowmass, and was revealed when the weather began to warm. The body had suffered decomposition and damage to the upper body, most likely the result of animal predation, which made immediate identification impossible. The following day, the body was taken to Denver General Hospital, where it was positively identified during autopsy through dental records as that of Dearborn, Michigan nurse Caryn Eileen Campbell. The autopsy determined that she had suffered several blows to the head from a blunt object, and a large blood pool surrounded her head. It was believed she was murdered shortly after she went missing. The Pitkin County Sheriff's Office announced that marks on her wrists seemed to indicate that Caryn Campbell had, at some point, been tied up. "All indications are that this is a homicide," said Colorado District Attorney Frank Tucker. Tucker expressed his anger at what he called speculation surrounding the case. For some investigators, who were familiar with recent cases, it was suspected that Campbell had fallen victim to a killer who had also claimed the lives of 12 other women in the West. Tucker said, "I am interested in convicting someone of this crime, not in hearing someone's pipe dreams. We have no evidence to tie this murder to any other we've had in the West at all at this point." When a reporter informed Dr. Raymond Godofsky of her tentative identification, he responded, "That's kind of what we expected. We'll have to wait and see what happens." This endless waiting has been very difficult for everyone involved. But I hope it's not her. After the positive identification, Caryn Campbell's body was flown to Detroit for burial. While Colorado investigators continued gathering evidence in Caryn Campbell's case, circumstances in other states revealed a chilling connection between her disappearance and those of other young women in Washington, Utah, and Idaho. These victims were all pretty, college-age women who seemed to vanish without a trace. Several months before Caryn Campbell went missing, 18-year-old Carol Derrinch was abducted by a man pretending to be a police officer. On November 8, 1974, Derrinch was approached by a man who presented a police badge and convinced her to accompany him to his car, a tan-colored Volkswagen Beetle. During the journey, the man attempted to handcuff her, but she managed to escape. This attempted kidnapping was not initially linked to the other disappearances. Months after Caryn Campbell's frozen body was discovered, police arrested 28-year-old Ted Bundy, a University of Utah student, after a chase. Inside Bundy's tan-colored Volkswagen, they found a crowbar, a flashlight, a ski mask, rope, handcuffs, a screwdriver, an ice pick, and a pantyhose mask. Carol Derrinch later identified Bundy as her abductor. Bundy's vehicle matched the description of the one used by the kidnapper, and his girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, provided information to detectives. Credit card receipts placed Bundy in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, when Campbell went missing. Released while the investigation continued, Bundy was placed under surveillance. Bundy was also suspected in the disappearances of women in Washington, including two abducted from Lake Sammamish Park in July 1974. Witnesses had seen them with a young man with his arm in a sling, calling himself Ted. In February 1976, Bundy went on trial for Carol Derrinch's kidnapping. Representing himself, he admitted to having no alibi for the day Derrinch was abducted but denied ever meeting her. Found guilty, he was sentenced to between 1 and 15 years in prison. Investigators in Colorado and Washington searched for more evidence linking Bundy to the murders. Bundy's Volkswagen was impounded, and FBI specialist Robert Neal found hair samples matching Caryn Campbell and 3 other victims. The impressions on Campbell's skull matched those made by Bundy's crowbar. On October 22, 1976, Colorado police charged Bundy with Caryn Campbell's murder. Transferred to Garfield County Jail in April 1977, Bundy planned his escape. On June 6, 1977, he jumped from a courthouse window but was recaptured 6 days later. He was then imprisoned in Glenwood Springs, where he planned a second escape. On December 31, 1977, Bundy crawled through the ceiling of his cell, jumped into the jailer's apartment, and walked out a free man. He made his way to Florida, determined to kill again. Although we will never know for sure how Bundy managed to abduct the young nurse, it is likely that he feigned an injury and asked her to help him carry something to his vehicle. When Campbell agreed to help, he lured her away from the hotel to a darkened parking lot, where he struck her over the head and bundled her into his Volkswagen Bug. At the time of her disappearance, it was long past sunset, and the temperatures had dropped significantly. Therefore, it stands to reason that the lot in question was pretty deserted. Caryn Campbell was last seen in an open corridor overlooking the pool area at the Wildwood Inn. This raised the possibility that Ted Bundy made contact with her from below. Perhaps she saw him fumbling with crutches and offered to help, or maybe he simply called out for assistance. Tragically, it seems Caryn fell for one of Bundy's ruses and was lured to her death. After beating and raping the 23-year-old, Bundy strangled her in his Volkswagen. He then drove 3 miles before hastily discarding her body on the side of Owl Creek Road. On January 15, 1978, Bundy attacked 5 students at the Chi Omega sorority house, killing 2 and leaving 3 with life-changing injuries. On February 9th, he abducted and murdered 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Captured on February 15th, Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death for the Chi Omega murders and later for Kimberly Leach's murder. Before his execution, Bundy admitted to several murders, including 3 in Colorado. He hinted at more victims but refused to elaborate, wanting to stay his execution. Colorado detective Matt Linville believed Bundy wanted to maintain total possession of his victims' true resting places. On January 23, 1989, The day before Bundy's execution, Caryn Campbell's father, Robert Campbell, told the Free Press, "You never really forgive something like that. You just try to put it behind you. The thing I'd like to have back, I can't." Despite his daughter's death, he was ambivalent about capital punishment, stating, "I'm not a vindictive person, but certainly you can't go around killing people, reluctantly, but I don't think executing Bundy will be a deterrent. People will keep killing." Ted Bundy was executed on January 24, 1989, without ever admitting his involvement in Caryn Campbell's death. Like many of his victims, Caryn Campbell never saw justice.
Ted Bundy's reign of terror left a trail of shattered lives and broken families across the country. The haunting memories of his victims, like Caryn Campbell, continue to echo through time, reminding us of the fragile nature of life and the darkness that can lurk behind a charming facade. As we close this chapter on Bundy's horrific crimes, we must remember not only the brutal acts he committed, but also the lives he stole and the families left to grieve. Each victim had dreams, hopes, and futures cruelly cut short. The anguish of their loss serves as a somber reminder to cherish our loved ones, remain vigilant, and strive for a world where such senseless violence can never take root again.
I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception.
Bundy requested the interview with Dr. Dobson because he had watched him serve on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. He trusted the Focus on the Family founder to convey his warnings accurately.
And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff,
the slasher movies that you're talking about,
that stuff is, I'm telling you from personal experience, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence.
Daniel Weiss with Focus on the Family Action says Bundy's words were prophetic.
I think there's a real disconnect in society where we can even 20 years later look at Ted Bundy and say, hey, we condemn what this man has done. It's horrible and tragic, and we don't like it. But at the same time, we have entertainment shows all over the place, like CSI, Special Victims Unit, and even a film today, My Bloody Valentine, which glorifies in this kind of sexualized violence that Bundy was committing. Bundy was really right to distrust the mainstream media because right now porn stars are on talk shows, they have best-selling books, and it's kind of like society is just covering up this idea that porn is harmful, and it's just harmless fun. Dr. Dobson knew better. He had shown as much by his service on the Attorney General's Commission, and Bundy knew this to be true, so he wanted to entrust that message with someone who would tell it accurately.
and this is where I guess where it counts, is to me that means that we go over things in great detail, but not just the incident itself. Ultimately, whether it's to you or to somebody else, because basically it all began in Washington State, that is, that's where I was living, that's where I grew up as a kid, and that's where I grew up as a young man, and those kinds of images, impulses, and behaviors which ultimately led to the violent behavior, occurred, if you will, in Washington State. That the kind of broad understanding that I'm looking for is going to come, during those years I lived in Washington State. Unfortunately, I guess from your standpoint, it was basically Washington State where those first crimes, incidences, murders that took place. Well, let's just do one here. I mean, let's start. Obviously, we got to start somewhere. And I think we might, it's a long shot, it's a pretty long shot, that you might be able to get something out of it. At least some of that so-called tangible evidence that might be of some value not only to you but to others. And maybe a bit of information, even if you don't find anything else, that might be of some value to families. Okay. So we'll do, I understand that at the Issaquah site, which I could describe to you, would describe to you if you want, there were three remains of three individuals found, two identified and one not, because of the kinds of remains that were found were so few and unidentifiable. Okay. What do you want? Where this? Description of the site first. How you get there? I mean, you just don't make this up, right? Maybe half a mile, quarter of a mile down this little side road. If you kept on flying all the way down. Oh well, Lord knows what the little creatures up there did, what the animals would have done. But I think well, let me start with one. Let me start this way. The unidentified remains. This is where I'm a little bit. The presence of the officers down here is a little bit unnerving. Some of this stuff I don't mind talking about, but because they wouldn't know from Adam. But names I can write it down, or I can whisper it to you, or whatever. I just don't want the police getting any kind of names at this point. Well, can you hear that?
I can hear it, yeah.
Okay. I just said that the Hawkins girl's head was severed and taken up the road about 25 to 50 yards and buried in a location about 10 yards west of the road on a rocky hillside. Did you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but not anything you would have found that I know of. If you would have found damage to the head, the jaw in particular, probably broken. But if you'd found that, you would have known who it was. But anyway, I don't know.
Right.
Is there any reason you asked me that question? I was moving up the alley. Using a briefcase and some crutches. And a young woman walked down. I saw her round the north end of the block into the alley and stop for a moment and then keep on walking down the alley toward me. And about halfway down the block, I encountered her and asked her to help me carry the briefcase, which she did, and we walked back up the alley. Across the street, turned right on the sidewalk in front of, I think, the fraternity house on the corner there. Rounded the corner to the left, going north on 47th, midway in the block, there used to be one of those parking lots they used to make out of burned down houses in that area. Let's see, we were to the car. All right. And basically, when we reached the car, what happened was I knocked her unconscious with the crowbar.
Where'd you have that?
By the car.
Outside?
Outside and back of the car.
Did she see it?
No.
Okay.
No. And then there were some handcuffs there, along with the crowbar.
Along with what?
The crowbar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they handcuffed her and put her in the the passenger side of the car and drove away.
Was she alive or dead then?
Oh no, she was quite she was unconscious, but she was very much alive.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that makes it among the things that makes it difficult is that at this point she was quite lucid, talking about things, about some. It's funny. It's not funny, but it's odd the kinds of things people say under those circumstances. And she said that she thought that she had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd thing to say. The long and short of it, I mean, I'm going to maybe try to make this get there by degrees. The long and short of it was that I again knocked her unconscious and strangled her and drug her into about 10 yards into the small grove of trees that was there.
What are you strangled with?
Cord.
Cord?
An old piece of rope.
Is something you brought there with you?
Yeah. Something that was in the car.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then what happened?
Then I packed the car up. By this time, it was almost dawn. It's just about dawn. Sun was coming up. And I went through my usual routine. I went through this routine where I was just absolutely, I would go through this, but on this particular morning, I was just absolutely, again, just shocked, kind of scared to death, shocked, horrified and I went down the road throwing everything that I'd had, the briefcase, out the window, throwing the briefcase, the crutches, the rope, the clothes, just tossing them out the window. This was just, I was in a sheer state of panic, of just absolute horror, It's like, at that point in time, this consciousness of what has really happened is like, you break out of a fever or something. I would, that is. And so I drove north on 90, then northeast on 90. At some point throwing articles out the window as I went. Articles of clothing, shoes, etc.
When did you remove those?
What?
The shoes, clothing.
Well, after we got out of the car, initially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I skipped over some stuff there, and we'll have to get back to it sometime, but I don't feel, it's just too hard for me to talk about right now. Oh, sure, yeah. I threw away the briefcase and the crutches and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the crowbar, everything. The handcuffs, everything. I get mad at myself a few weeks later because I'd have to go out and buy another pair. I mean, it's not comical, but that's what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I mean, the Spanish test is pretty darn good, if you ask me.
That's what she said. Unless she was hallucinating. She said everybody called her George.
George?
That's what she said. Or how about that? She used a safety pin because apparently her blue slacks were a bit too big. Or that's about all I know. I mean, I suppose it was there's you know, I'm sure there are bits and pieces that'll come back to me, but there wasn't a lot. You know, obviously there wasn't a lot of conversation, but talk about details coming back. I couldn't find one of the shoes, so I thought it was there, but it wasn't. So I went back. This was the next day. Got on my bicycle, rode back to that little parking lot. I knew there were police all over the place by that time, but I was kind of nervous because, and I'll tell you why in a minute, because I'd left and my car had been parked there, so I may have seen it. Now something was found there that might connect me. So I went back to that parking lot and I found both the pierced earrings and the shoe laying in the parking lot at about 5 in the afternoon. So I surreptitiously gathered them up and rode off.
After the police had checked that area?
Well, you can tell me. I'd seen them. I'd seen whole streams of them driving around all over the place, but they were concentrating on places like the park, nearby park. I don't know if I'll bet you they couldn't have looked in that parking lot and missed the white patent leather clog and the 2 white pierced earrings, hoops. More than 2 weeks before that, I have been using the same modus operandi in the same neighborhood, in front now of the same sorority house that George Ann Hawkins disappeared from. I encountered a girl going out the door and asked her to help me. Walked her all the way to that lot. 11 o'clock on a Friday night. And I was drunk. I was drunk and I was just babbling on, and I told her I worked in Olympia, that I lived in a rooming house. I mean, I was horrified later on. But,
So were you drunk when you got pockets?
yes, more or less, but yes. That was basically part of the MO at that time, yeah. But I got all the way to the car, and this would happen sometimes, and just said, no, I don't want to do it. I said, thank you, see you later, and she walked away. But after the Hawkins thing, I was, just paranoid as hell that this girl would say, something weird happened to me a couple of weeks ago. This guy came along with crutches and asked me to help him. He took me to a Volkswagen, said he worked in Olympia and lived here in the University District. And how many people could that apply to? So, there you are. But of course, after, in June, after a week, it's, what with all the local wildlife, there's not much left.
Were you going back to that scene to commit sex acts?
Well, I don't want to talk about that right now. We will talk about it someday, but I don't really have enough to give you the background on that. I want us to work into that.
Okay. Did you ever bury anybody?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, in my, you might say, my more coherent, not coherent. That's when I was really going all out and took my time. Yeah, I did. And I mean, it's quite clear. I mean, there's no question about, almost without question, those who have been found were not, and those who haven't been found were buried.